Responsible lending laws are now going to be axed. That's right, all the laws that have been put in place to protect borrowers and to protect the financial system are now being taken away in a desperate attempt to keep the property market and the economy going. That's right, after all the risks were exposed from the Banking Royal Commission, where it showed that banks were doing dodgy lending, the government's now turning a blind eye and they're turning the money taps back on, and they're going to start making it rain, giving cheap, easy credit to everybody. This just came in this morning. Let's have a look. Okay, let's take a deep dive into these responsible lending laws that are now going to be axed. So it says here, responsible lending laws that fueled a bitter court fight between the corporate regulator and Westpac will be scrapped for banks, which will be subject to less credit rules to encourage the flow of loans and boost the economic recovery from the recession. In a shift from lender beware back towards traditional borrower beware, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg will on Friday announce the government will in effect dump the responsible lending law that was imposed by the Rudd Labor government in 2009 following the America's subprime loan crisis. What the heck? So there was a subprime crisis in 2008 and 2009, like I'm sure you're all aware of, and this led to a housing market crash in the US. But hey, we're now in the deepest recession since the Great Depression, and they're going to ease all these lending restrictions, and you know, what could possibly go wrong? This is shocking, and I can't believe they're doing this. Let's keep on reading. The simplification will remove the Australian Securities and Investment Commission from enforcing the responsible lending rules for banks and other mainstream lenders, while bolstering ASIC's oversight of payday lender for vulnerable borrowers. I guess this really does prove that the government and banks are in bed together, and that, you know, the banks really do run this country, and you know, they can crash the economy and then, you know, use whatever they want. They can tell government, look, you got to ease this, you got to do this for us, otherwise the economy is going to crash. In a red tape reduction, banks and many non-bank lenders will be placed under less prescriptive prudential lending standards currently overseen by the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, while eliminating the stricter ASIC lending rules. So what this means is they're just pretty much going to make it rain, give loans to anybody, and it's going to make this whole financial system a lot less stable and a lot more risky. The deregulation responds to concerns of the Banks and Reserve Bank of Australia Governor Philip Lowe that following the Hayne Banking Royal Commission and ASIC's pursuit of Westpac in the Shiraz and Wagyu lending case, banks became too conservative and squeezed the flow of credit. So banks can pretty much just shut the flow of credit, and then they can make all the rules and say, hey, if you want us, you know, to tighten our lending restrictions and you want to, you know, mess with our business, we'll just stop lending to everyone and crash the economy. Greater emphasis on self-responsibility means lenders will not be penalised if borrowers mislead on their loan applications, enabling banks to rely on income and expense information provided by borrowers and speeding up the credit approval process. So this means that, you know, if the banks do dodgy lending standards, or, you know, they let borrowers borrow huge amounts of money, like, you know, 10 times their income buying properties, and if things go bad, the bank go, look, no, it's all the borrower's fault. You know, it's not our fault. He was the one that said it, he could repay. And, you know, there are a lot of people that aren't financially savvy. And if the bank says, look, we'll lend you $600,000 for your home loan, a lot of people will just take that, even though they may not be able to repay. I remember when I first went for a pre-approval, the bank offered, you know, me 10 times my income. There was no way I could be able to pay that back. But luckily for me, I was financially educated, so I could say, no, there's no way I'm borrowing that much. But there will be a lot of people that will just borrow as much as they can, and this is going to lead to a huge amounts of risky loans and really put you know, the economic system and the housing market at risk later on. Mr. Frydenberg said the most significant reforms to credit rules in a decade would increase the flow of credit to households and businesses, reduce red tape, and strengthen protection for vulnerable customers. Well, I don't see how strengthen protection for vulnerable customers, but remember, Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg were the ones that didn't want the Banking Royal Commission, and now all of a sudden, you know, that things are really starting to hit the fan. You know, they're doing a backstep, and you know, they're overruling all these things that were fixed in the Banking Royal Commission. As Australia continues to recover from the pandemic, it is more important than ever that there is no unnecessary barriers to the flow of credit to households and small businesses. So he's saying the way to fix the problem is to throw more money and more debt in it. So this is crazy. The way this economy relies on is people getting into more and more debt, spending more and more money, and just making this thing a lot more unsustainable and a lot more risky. The surprise move disempowers ASIC only 3 weeks after its chairman, James Shipton, insisted that the responsible lending law is now settled, after the agency abandoned its prosecution of Westpac over thousands of home loans. So just as they got all these lending restrictions tightened, and they've finally got the responsible lending in check, just 3 weeks, nah. We can't last 3 weeks with, responsible lending. We need to go back to dodgy lending, easy credit, because this whole economy relies on easy credit and debt. While the Hayne Royal Commission ultimately gave banks a reprieve in 2019 from a formal crackdown on responsible lending laws for consumers, it pressured banks to undertake more forensic investigation of loan applications. So what happened, there was a Banking Royal Commission where banks were told they really need to assess customers' spending, because banks just had a blanket rule where everyone had the same amount of spending, and they're just giving loans saying the average Joe just spends $1,000 a month on consumer items, where then they're told no, they need to look more into it. And now they're stepping back from that, saying, what, don't look at that, just give them money, get the money out there. The legal battle tested Westpac's argument that the National Credit Act provides banks with the discretion on using benchmarks when assessing whether loans are suitable for customers, and that customers can be expected to reduce historic levels of spending to meet repayment obligations. So in simple terms, what this means is the banks are saying, if people start struggling paying their home loan, well then they can just stop spending everything else and put all their money in their home loan. Do we really want an economy where people's income all goes towards their house and they have no money left over to spend in the real economy? I don't think people want that. And this is what's making the Australian economy, at huge risk, because all our money is tied up in housing, and the banks are saying, look, housing comes first, don't spend any money on anything else, drop all your expenses and put it all into the housing market. Now this is something really crazy. After ASIC lost the Westpac case for a second time on appeal in the full federal court, the regulator opted in July to appeal the High Court after receiving warnings from the heads of the Reserve Bank of Australia and Treasury that would undermine banking lending during the recession. So what are the regulators for? Are they regulating? I don't think so. And I think that the banks have way more power than the regulators, and they can, stop lending and crash the economy, and then they can, pretty much manipulate the regulators to do whatever they want. Dr. Lowe said last month the pendulum has probably swung a bit too far to blaming the bank if a loan goes bad. So some banks have the mindset, well, we can't make loans that go bad. We can't have a world in which if a borrower can't repay the loan, it's always the bank's fault. So there we have it. If loans go bad and the banks start giving out all these risky loans, that's not their fault. They're now going to blame the customers. It's your fault. And here's something that's really alarming. They said, on a portfolio basis, we want banks to make some loans that actually go bad. Because if a bank never makes a loan that goes bad, it means they're not extending enough credit. Did they just really say that? They want banks to give loans that are going to go bad. Wow. It just shows how much of a Ponzi scheme this economy really is. And I don't know what kind of risks this is going to lead down the road. ANZ and Commonwealth Bank of Australia chief executives warned this month that responsible lending laws and the challenge of dealing with two regulators and an ombudsman charged with overseeing the provisions of credit are adding to the cost of doing business. Let's now shed a tear for the poor banks that have to pay too much money to do their job. APRA's prudential lending standards will become the main line of defence for authorised deposit-taking institutions, aka banks, governing more than 90% of credit extended to non-businesses. Lenders will continue to be subject to standards for credit risk management and expectations of sound lending practices. For recognised non-bank lenders, they will be bound by APRA's prudential lending standards, but these will be policed by ASIC. Sure, borrowers will continue to be able to raise concerns and seek external dispute resolution via the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. At the other end of the credit market, payday lenders and consumer leases face a crackdown in response to push from consumer advocates. New rules will aim to protect welfare recipients by restricting payday loans, known as small amount credit contracts, and consumer leases for people who receive 50% or more of their net income from Centrelink. And that's another thing that's been quite alarming during this pandemic and lockdown, is a huge amount of payday loans. I don't know what kind of risk this is going to lead to the financial system in the future, but it's definitely not going to be good. Also, let me know, guys, do you like these breaking news videos? Do you want me to do more videos like this on breaking news? This was wild. I just wanted to get it out to you. I was shocked, and you know, my jaw hit the floor when I saw this article came out. And what this means and what this is going to lead to is this could lead to a housing boom if banks just start giving loans to everyone, like what happened in the US, where they offered ninja loans, meaning people had no income, no assets, and you know, bang, you're approved. You get a home, you get a home. You know, they're doing Oprah Winfrey. Everybody gets something. And also the Reserve Bank of Australia is hinted that they're going to drop interest rates to 0.1% from its 0.25%. They're going to do more quantitative easing. They're going to provide cheap lending to banks at 0.1% interest. So that's right, banks can borrow at 0.1% interest, so they can pass those interest rates to borrowers, meaning interest rates will fall even further. And we do know that low interest rates and easy credit often leads to house price booms. I don't know what's going to happen this time with unemployment so high, but it's definitely going to help house prices. So we'll have to continue to monitor this. But it is just going to kick the can down the road, and it's going to make this whole financial system a lot riskier, and it could lead to a huge housing market crash once all these things start to unravel. Also, the Reserve Bank is doing something called forward guidance, where they pretty much tell the markets what they're going to do. And what they want is they want to lower the Australian dollar. And if the Australian dollar drops, this could also further inflate asset prices like property, where people take their money out of the bank because the Reserve Bank is at a war to devalue the currency, and they may put it into real estate that would go up if interest rates drop, if the Australian dollar drops, and if lending standards ease. The Aussie dollar has dropped from around 74 cents US to around 70 cents. And that's because, like I said, the Reserve Bank is planning to drop their cash rate to 0.1%. They're going to start quantitative easing, or do more quantitative easing, where they buy longer dated government bonds, which means that, you know, the government can borrow at cheaper rates. So the government would be able to borrow at 0.1% because the Reserve Bank's pretty much said, look, there's not much else we can do. So they're going to want to offer cheap credit to the government, so the government can borrow huge amounts of money and make it rain at the federal budget that's going to be announced next week on the 6th of October. So what do you think about this? Do you think easing lending standards was the right move to do right now? Or do you think this is just kicking the can down the road, and it's making this bubble even bigger, and it's making the risk for when things finally do unravel even worse? And if you haven't already, please smash the like button. It really helped out the channel a lot. I want to thank you all again for your support. The channel has blown up over the past few months. I've really been loving it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more awesome content on property market updates, the latest economic and finance news, and of course, I'll see you in the next video.